California in the 1970s, sunshine, suburbs, and the promise of peace. Families built new lives here, in quiet streets lined with orange trees and bicycles leaning against white picket fences. But beneath that calm, something dark was about to wake. It started small, petty thefts, a missing dog, strange noises outside bedroom windows. At first, no one connected them. No one thought danger could hide in such ordinary places. By 1973, a series of burglaries began spreading across the Sacramento suburbs. The intruder seemed to know his targets, entering through sliding glass doors, avoiding lights, stealing personal items, sometimes breaking in while families slept. Police called him the Visalia ransacker. The ransacker was meticulous. He'd take jewelry, coins, photographs, but leave behind more valuable things like TVs or cash. It wasn't about money. It was about control. He would move objects around the house, eat food from the kitchen, or lay out women's underwear on the floor before disappearing. For nearly 2 years, Visalia was held hostage by fear. Women double-locked their doors. Fathers sat up with guns beside them. Still, he came more than 120 times between 1974 and 1975. Then, one night in September 1975, things escalated. A man named Claude Snelling, a local journalism professor, woke to find the ransacker inside his home, trying to kidnap his teenage daughter. Snelling lunged to protect her, but the intruder pulled the trigger. Snelling was shot and killed instantly. The killer fled into the night, leaving behind a stunned community, and the first clear sign that the ransacker wasn't just a thief anymore. Police formed one of the largest task forces in the region's history, but they were chasing a ghost. The man they sought moved silently, planned meticulously, and seemed to anticipate every police strategy. Then, in early 1976, just as suddenly as he appeared, he vanished. What the police didn't know was that he had simply moved. Roughly 90 miles north, a new pattern began to emerge, and a new name would soon be whispered in every California household. The East Area Rapist. Cue tense ambient music, newspaper clippings fade across the screen. The first assault took place in a quiet Sacramento suburb in June 1976. A woman was alone in her home when she woke to a flashlight beam blinding her eyes. A man whispered, "Don't move or I'll kill you." He tied her up, assaulted her, and disappeared into the night. Within months, it happened again and again. Same pattern, a masked man, often armed, entering homes late at night. He always wore gloves, sometimes a ski mask, and spoke through clenched teeth. He moved like he'd studied police procedure, checking rooms, cutting phone lines, controlling the scene. At first, detectives believed it was a series of random crimes. Then they noticed something horrifyingly consistent. Every victim lived near a park or a canal, providing quick escape routes. He would stalk his victims days before, calling them, watching them, learning their routines. Soon, the media gave him a name: the East Area Rapist. Between 1976 and 1979, at least 50 women across Northern California were attacked. He targeted young women, couples, even families, tying up husbands, stacking dishes on their backs as alarms, whispering threats while he attacked their wives. He taunted police with phone calls. "I'm going to kill again. You'll never catch me." He was always one step ahead. Witnesses described a slim, athletic man with piercing eyes. Police sketches were everywhere, but they might as well have been blank pages. There was nothing unique enough to find him. As panic spread, self-defense classes filled up, gun sales spiked, and every creak in the night made Californians hold their breath. Neighborhood watch groups patrolled streets that had never known fear before. But what no one realized, not yet, was that this nightmare was only half over. The East Area Rapist would soon evolve into something far worse. He was growing bolder, angrier, and ready to cross the one line that would turn him from a predator into a monster. By the end of 1976, Sacramento had changed. Front doors that once stood open during summer nights were now barricaded with broomsticks jammed under handles. Families slept with baseball bats beside their beds. The local papers no longer covered community fairs. They printed warnings. Lock your doors, don't sleep alone. The East Area Rapist had made ordinary life feel like a trap. He knew every weakness, fences, backyards, window latches, and he studied them. Detectives discovered footprints in flower beds, prime marks on frames, and in several cases, cords cut from window blinds that would later be used to tie victims. Every scene spoke of obsession and rehearsal. He wasn't improvising. He was hunting. He struck on weekends, often between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. He preferred single-story homes near open space. He slipped in silently, using the darkness like a weapon. Victims described hearing faint scraping noises outside hours before the attack. Sometimes their pets would growl. When they looked, nothing. He was already watching from the shadows. Inside, he'd whisper commands. Don't move, don't scream. He tied victims with shoelaces or cut cords, gagged them, and always took his time. To police, his control seemed surgical. He spoke little, except to whisper chilling reassurances. I just want money. But after he left, nothing of value was missing. Instead, he took trophies, rings, photos, identification cards, fragments of lives he'd destroyed. As his attacks multiplied, detectives noticed something worse. His confidence was growing. He began targeting couples. He would wait until both were asleep, shine his flashlight in their eyes, and threaten to kill the woman if the man moved. Then he'd tie them both, the man first, often face down, balancing dishes on the man's back. If I hear them rattle, she dies. He would then drag the woman into another room. Police reports never fully printed the details, but every survivor told the same story, a man who planned every second. And yet when he finished, he sometimes stayed. He'd pace the hallway, eat food from the fridge, cry, whisper to himself. One woman remembered him saying, "Mommy, help me." Was it an act or a glimpse of a fractured mind? No one could tell. Law enforcement created a massive task force, more than 40 officers, psychologists, and forensic analysts. They mapped every attack, searching for a pattern. Detective Richard Shelby, one of the lead investigators, later said, "He was the kind of guy who studied our reports. Every time we adjusted our tactics, he changed his." He moved like a shadow through the suburbs, Rancho Cordova, Citrus Heights, Carmichael. Police set up night patrols and decoy houses. But he always struck somewhere else, as if listening to their radios. In one chilling moment, a police officer nearly caught him. Late one night, a patrol spotted a masked man fleeing a neighborhood after an attempted break-in. A chase began. The suspect vaulted fences, vanished into a canal, and disappeared. When police searched the area, they found a ski mask, shoelaces, and a knife. The rapist had escaped by seconds. Then, after some time, the phone calls began. At first, victims received heavy breathing on the line. Then whispers. "Remember when we played? Merry Christmas, it's me again." One woman picked up the phone months after her attack and heard him growl, "Gonna kill you." Police traced lines, installed recorders, nothing helped. He called from payphones, always brief, always in control. The psychological torment was as precise as his physical attacks. By late 1978, the East Area Rapist had committed over 50 confirmed assaults across multiple counties. He had evolved from burglar to serial sexual predator, and his signature now stretched over hundreds of miles. But he wasn't finished. Something inside him was changing. He had mastered fear, now he wanted power. Control was no longer enough, he wanted permanence. February 1978. Sacramento County. A young couple, Brian and Katie Magyar, were walking their dog after dinner. They lived in the same neighborhoods where the rapist once prowled. That night, neighbors heard gunshots. Moments later, both Brian and Katie were found dead in a nearby yard. The attacker had chased them, cornered them, and shot them point blank. The evidence, footprints, shoelaces, shell casings, matched the East Area Rapist. For the first time, he had killed. But police couldn't prove it. No fingerprints, no clear witness, just the pattern. And then, as before, he vanished. In late 1979, hundreds of miles south, a new killer emerged in Santa Barbara and Ventura counties. He crept into homes at night, tied up couples, and murdered them brutally. He was called the original Night Stalker. No one connected him to the East Area Rapist. Different county, different M.O. But the method, the bindings, the break-ins, the obsessive ritual were almost identical. Years would pass before detectives realized they were chasing the same man. The same ghost who had haunted Sacramento had simply moved again, evolving, adapting, killing. And for the next 7 years, he would become one of the most terrifying killers in American history. A man who would slaughter couples as they slept, who would watch funerals of his victims, and who would vanish just as suddenly as he appeared. The 1980s had begun. California's Central Valley had healed, or at least tried to. The East Area Rapist had gone silent. No new attacks, no new calls. People exhaled. But the silence was deceiving. He hadn't stopped. He had simply moved. After the Magyar murders in 1978, the man the press had dubbed the East Area Rapist vanished from Northern California. Then 2 years later, strange murders began hundreds of miles south, in Santa Barbara County. Police found homes broken into with surgical precision. Couples tied, bludgeoned, or strangled. Women assaulted. And the killer, silent, methodical, and almost invisible. They called him the original Night Stalker. Original, only after Richard Ramirez later took the same nickname in Lowe's Angels. What no one knew then was that both monsters, the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker, were the same man, Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. December 30, 1979, Goleta, California. Dr. Robert Offerman and his girlfriend, Deborah Manning, were found murdered in their home. Police discovered bindings discarded near the bodies. The killer had cut them loose mid-attack, likely because one victim had fought back. Bullets, shoe impressions, and rope matched the East Area Rapist's patterns. Next year, it happened again. Charlene and Lyman Smith were found bludgeoned to death in Ventura. Charlene had been raped. Each crime scene told the same story: forced entry, bindings, control, rage, and a terrifying precision. He no longer needed to whisper threats or taunt survivors. He left none alive. Forensic experts later pieced together how DeAngelo operated. He would stalk victims for weeks, sometimes months. Neighbors would see a strange man jogging past their house, pretending to be part of the community. Other times, people noticed open gates or missing window screens, never realizing they were being tested. Once he knew the layout, he returned mask on, knife ready, gun in hand. He slipped inside when the victims slept, often through sliding glass doors. He'd wake them with a flashlight in their faces and the same chilling words: "Don't move." But now, he wasn't interested in escape routes or noise discipline. He was in full control, and he had grown darker. He tied both victims, assaulted the women, and finally killed them. Sometimes with a gun. Other times with a blunt object, often something from the victim's own home. And just like before, he lingered. He would eat food from their fridge, take trinkets and disappear, always leaving behind a trail of fear, never himself. Between 1979 and 1986, the original Night Stalker was linked to 10 known murders. Each case struck the same note: calculated, personal, and monstrous. Forensics found the same DNA profile in all, but in the 1980s, DNA was science fiction. They couldn't match it to anyone. Detectives could only connect the crimes through rope types, shoe prints, and eerily similar scenes. Southern California entered its own wave of paranoia. People slept with guns. Hardware stores sold out of locks, deadbolts, and window bars. Dogs became alarm systems. For the press, he was a phantom. For the police, a nightmare that wouldn't leave a trace. And then, in 1986, after the brutal murder of 18-year-old Janelle Cruz in Irvine, he vanished again. No more murders. No more attacks. Nothing. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. The police effort. For decades, detectives across multiple counties, Sacramento, Contra Costa, Ventura, Santa Barbara, Orange, shared files, compared evidence, and debated theories. Was he a soldier? A police officer? A construction worker? No one could explain his tactical knowledge, his stealth, his obsession with knots and control. Years passed. Task forces disbanded. Files collected dust. But the legend of the East Area Rapist/original Night Stalker grew darker, more mythical. He became California's ghost story, a serial predator who had escaped justice, living somewhere among ordinary people. What no one knew was that he was still right there, in the same state, living quietly as a husband, father, and grandfather, working in a grocery store, shopping like everyone else, laughing, smiling, while carrying the memories of the lives he had destroyed. The years rolled on, the 1990s, the 2000s. New technology reshaped forensics, especially DNA analysis. Old evidence from crime scenes was digitized and preserved. But there was still no name. The profile was clear: white male, 510, fit, possibly ex-military or law enforcement, obsessive, with escalating sexual violence and a need for dominance. Yet there were no matches in any database. Until 2001. That year, forensic labs made a breakthrough. They confirmed that the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were indeed the same person. It was official. Two monsters were one. Detectives renamed the case EAR-ONS, the East Area Rapist/original Night Stalker. Now there was no doubt. They just needed to find him. For decades he had hidden in plain sight, his crimes frozen in evidence boxes, his DNA sleeping in a file. But time was no longer on his side. Because in 2018, a new kind of detective would wake that DNA, not from fingerprints, not from mugshots, but from something he could never have imagined. For more than 40 years, California's most notorious predator had remained a ghost. He had outsmarted police, vanished before technology could reach him, and blended back into the quiet fabric of everyday life. But the world had changed, and the walls around him were about to close in. Every crime scene DeAngelo left behind contained traces of him: skin cells, hair, microscopic stains that investigators preserved in evidence vials. Back in the 1980s, this meant nothing. DNA testing was barely a concept. By the 1990s, it could identify a person, but only if that person's DNA was already in a law enforcement database. And Joseph DeAngelo, he'd never been arrested for a felony. His record was clean. His DNA wasn't in any system. So his samples sat quietly, frozen in plastic tubes, waiting for science to catch up. By 2010, a new generation of detectives had inherited the cold case. Among them was Paul Holes, a relentless investigator from Contra Costa County who refused to let the monster disappear into history. Holes spent nights combing through old reports, photos, and fingerprints. He believed the answer lay not in new crimes, but in old evidence. Then came 2017, a turning point. Holmes learned about genetic genealogy, a new forensic approach using public ancestry websites like GEDmatch to identify relatives of unknown DNA samples. It was a method no one had ever used in criminal investigation on this scale. If a killer's distant cousin or relative had ever uploaded their DNA to an ancestry site, the algorithm could find a match. From there, genealogists could build a family tree backward, tracing generations until the unknown DNA found its rightful branch. Building the family tree. Using DNA collected from one of the 1980s crime scenes, forensic specialists created a digital profile of the Golden State Killer's genome. They uploaded it to GEDmatch, a free public database where millions had voluntarily shared their genetic data to learn about heritage and ethnicity. Within hours, the program returned a few partial matches, distant cousins, likely fourth or fifth generation relatives. From there, a small team of genealogists began building possible ancestral trees, linking names, dates, marriages, and births. Each branch eliminated dozens of possibilities. Each leaf was another clue. Slowly, through patient analysis, the pool of potential suspects narrowed from thousands to hundreds to just one extended family living in California. And in that family line, a name kept resurfacing. Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. DeAngelo fit the profile perfectly. Born 1945, Air Force veteran, former police officer, lived in the exact regions connected to both crime sprees. He'd been fired from the Auburn Police Department in 1979 for shoplifting, a wrench, and a dog repellent spray. It was a small crime that forced him out of law enforcement, and, as detectives would later believe, may have triggered his rage to escalate. Paul Holes and the FBI began covert surveillance. They followed DeAngelo through Sacramento suburbs, observing his routines. He lived quietly in Citrus Heights, a father and grandfather retired, blending into the neighborhood. Investigators needed one thing, his DNA. But they couldn't simply ask for it. They had to find it naturally. One afternoon, agents watched as DeAngelo stepped out of a store and discarded a tissue into a trash bin. When he drove away, forensic experts collected it. They rushed it to the lab. Hours later, the results came back. The DNA was a perfect match. The man who had haunted California for decades, the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, the Golden State Killer, had finally been unmasked. April 24, 2018. A quiet suburban street in Citrus Heights. It was 5:00 p.m. when unmarked cars rolled to a stop outside a modest single-story house. Neighbors watched as FBI agents surrounded the property. DeAngelo stepped outside, dressed casually, looking like any other aging retiree. When officers approached, he didn't resist. He simply said, "I have a roast in the oven." It was over. After more than 40 years, justice had found him, through his own bloodline. At the station, DeAngelo was calm, almost detached. He muttered about an inner voice, something he called Jerry, a personality he blamed for his crimes. But investigators saw through the act. This wasn't multiple personality disorder. This was a man confronting the final collapse of his double life. In his home, detectives found hundreds of items: jewelry, driver's licenses, and photographs and trophies from victims. Each one a chilling echo of the past. The monster had been hiding behind the face of an ordinary man. In 2020, Joseph DeAngelo, frail, in an orange jumpsuit sitting in a wheelchair, faced a Sacramento courtroom packed with survivors, victims, families, and media. He pleaded guilty to 13 counts of murder and 13 counts of kidnapping. He also admitted to numerous sexual assaults that could no longer be prosecuted due to the statute of limitations. One by one, survivors stood to read their statements. Their voices trembled but did not break. They spoke of lost childhoods, of trauma, of nights haunted by footsteps and whispers. Some addressed him directly. "You ruined lives," one woman said, "but you didn't destroy us." On August 21, 2020, the judge sentenced DeAngelo to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As he was led away, he whispered quietly, "I'm truly sorry to everyone I hurt." But for many, it was too late for apologies. The Golden State Killer case changed criminal justice forever. It proved that even decades-old DNA could speak, if science was willing to listen. After DeAngelo's arrest, dozens of cold cases across the U.S. were reopened using the same genealogical technique. Killers who believed they had escaped the clock found time turning against them. For the victims, closure finally replaced fear. For the investigators, it was proof that no crime truly stays unsolved, only waiting for the right key to unlock it. Joseph DeAngelo lived two lives, one as a husband, a father, a neighbor, and one as a predator who terrorized a state. He believed he could hide forever. But in the end, his own blood told the truth. When Joseph DeAngelo was led away in handcuffs, California didn't celebrate. It exhaled. 4 decades of unanswered fear had finally taken human shape. The mask had fallen, and underneath it wasn't a monster from legend, but a man who had once sworn to protect others. In the years after his arrest, survivors and families of victims began to reclaim their stories. For many, DeAngelo had been an invisible shadow for 40 years. A faceless evil that lived only in nightmares and newspaper clippings. Now they could look that evil in the eye. There was Jane Carson Sandler, one of his earliest rape survivors, who once lived every night in terror that he would return. She faced him in court, calm and composed, saying, "You didn't win, I'm still here." There was Debbie Domingo, daughter of one of his murder victims. She said justice had finally allowed her to stop grieving and start living. Each statement wasn't just anger, it was release. For 40 years, their stories had ended in question marks. Now they ended in periods. The revelation of DeAngelo's double life stunned the public. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, even helpful. He mowed his lawn, fixed bikes for kids, and exchanged small talk over fences. He raised 3 daughters. But behind those walls, the same mind that had orchestrated terror decades earlier still existed. Only dormant. Psychologists later studied his case as an extreme form of compartmentalization. The ability to live 2 completely separate moral identities. To his family, he was dad. To the world, he was the Golden State Killer. It was a chilling reminder that monsters don't always hide in darkness. Sometimes they wave at you from their driveway. For detectives like Paul Holes, the arrest was the end of a personal war. He had spent 24 years chasing a ghost. When the DNA match came back, Holes said, "It wasn't triumph, it was relief. We finally gave these people their peace." Retired officers who had worked the case in the 1970s attended the court hearings, some in tears, others silent. For them, it wasn't just an arrest. It was redemption for every victim they had failed to save, every night spent haunted by unanswered questions. The Golden State Killer case didn't just solve one mystery, it rewrote the rulebook of modern crime solving. The use of genealogy, became a revolutionary forensic tool. By combining public DNA databases with family tree mapping, investigators could now unmask killers who had hidden for generations. In the months following DeAngelo's arrest, more than 150 cold cases across the U.S. were reopened using the same method. From unidentified victims to long-forgotten serial killers, justice found new breath. The case also sparked debate. How much privacy should we sacrifice to solve crimes? Should family DNA data be used to catch relatives without consent? But for the families of the victims, one truth outweighed every ethical argument. Their loved ones could finally rest. Inside California State Prison, Joseph DeAngelo became a ghost of his former self, quiet, withdrawn, rarely speaking. He spent most days reading or staring out a narrow window. Inmates rarely bothered him. There was nothing left to say. He had confessed to his crimes, pleaded guilty, and in doing so, ended one of the largest criminal investigations in U.S. history. He would never step outside those walls again. For a man who had once controlled every movement of his victims, his final punishment was stillness. Out of the darkness, something unexpected grew: connection. Survivors formed communities. Podcasts, documentaries, and online forums began to tell their stories in their own voices, not through headlines. One of them, Michelle McNamara, the late journalist and author of I'll Be Gone in the Dark, had reignited public interest in the case before her untimely death in 2016. Her work, published posthumously, became the emotional backbone of the modern investigation. Her husband, actor Patton Oswalt, later said, "She didn't live to see him caught, but she helped the world remember him long enough for others to finish the job." Her book title came from a line DeAngelo had once whispered to a victim: "You'll be silent forever, and I'll be gone in the dark." Those words, meant to terrify, became his own prophecy. For many who followed the story, DeAngelo's capture wasn't just about punishment. It was about faith in truth. That even when time buries evidence, when memories fade, justice waits. It reminded a generation of investigators and citizens that every choice leaves a trace. A fingerprint, a fiber, a cell, a memory. And one day, those traces will speak. In the end, the Golden State Killer was not undone by guilt or confession or conscience. He was undone by the smallest thing imaginable: a fragment of DNA carried silently through generations, waiting for a world advanced enough to listen. As the final frame fades, we return to the empty streets where it all began. California at sunset, calm and safe once again. He thought he could outrun time. But time remembers. And now so do we.